Hello everyone. It's a great pleasure and a great honor to be here, even remotely. My name is Vassilis Bakopoulos. I'm the head of research for the Mobile Marketing Association. I have the unique pleasure and honor to have your time and attention for the next 20 minutes. And I have, I believe, something very interesting to share with you. Just last week, we released this exciting new work that I'm going to be talking about. I would like to spend a couple of minutes just to introduce the topic a little bit and why it's important. We think that it's one of the most challenging issues in marketing right now. So this is why we spend the best part of this year to kind of put together this exciting new research. Before I get into the actual presentation, I'd like to take a moment and thank all the partners that we had in this important initiative. I want to start by thanking Newstar, who has been our very close partner in kind of putting together the analysis and working with us along the way. I want to thank our academic advisors, our esteemed panel of academic advisors from UCLA, from Oxford University. I also want to thank our marketer advisors from all these important companies that you can see on this page, who ensured that our assumptions were practical and they were grounded in reality. And then, of course, last but not least, our data partner Numerator, who provided a lot of the sales data for this analysis. Now, what are we solving for, and why is this an important question? The thing that we're solving for today in this presentation is what is the best approach to plan a campaign and to optimize a campaign, an advertising campaign. And it's interesting that this is still a big, important challenge for marketers. And it is an important challenge for marketers for a number of reasons. Partly because there's a number of different frameworks and marketing theories that exist in terms of what's important. For instance, should you try to plan and optimize to maximize reach, or should you plan and try to maximize the actual outcomes of your campaign? Should you focus on targeting, or should you reach more broadly kind of your audience? The other interesting thing is that there's different media, and each one of these different media come with their own philosophies. If you grew up or if you were started your career in a TV-dominated environment, you probably have a lot of those kind of assumptions in your mind in terms of what works better and how you plan a specific campaign. Whereas if you're more kind of focused in digital, you may have a different framework. And last but not least, we have different metrics. Metrics that are more accessible, like for instance, how many impressions you served and how many of those were viewable or not, may not necessarily be the best thing that you need to actually optimize your campaign, right? So sometimes just because something is accessible, it doesn't mean that it's the best thing that we need to use in order to plan and optimize the campaign. So for all those different reasons, campaign planning and optimization is still an important marketing challenge. Now, in this environment, in 2020 and entering 2021, most media plans are still created to maximize reach. We said that there's a number of different frameworks, but we know that most of those, the actual plans that are being created, are created with the assumption that we're trying to find the least expensive way of reaching the largest number of eyeballs. Now, there is a fundamental assumption behind this, and the assumption is that all of those eyeballs are the same. Now, it's an assumption, it's a hypothesis, but we know that this is not a correct assumption. We know that it's a working assumption because we know that not all eyeballs are the same. We know, for instance, that on the one hand, you have consumers that will buy your brand anyway, right? So what is really the point of advertising to these consumers? Because they're going to buy your brand anyway. We also know that there is the other side of the spectrum, people who, for a number of reasons, for a whole host of reasons, they will not buy you. There's a very, very kind of big challenge for you to convert some people for a number of reasons. And then there's some people in the middle. people who for some reason, are maybe they have bought your brand before, maybe not, but they have the right characteristics to be more responsive to your advertising. So the challenge is, how do you find those people, right? And how do you kind of, focus on those people more? And this is where outcomes-based planning comes in. And outcomes-based planning is a new approach to planning, is a new, I want to say also growth framework, and I'm going to explain that in a minute, that we are developing, we have developed at the MMA in conjunction with Newstar. And the idea here is that you can sacrifice some reach in order to target consumer segments that have the right characteristics to be more responsive to a brand's advertising, right? So this is about, like I said, focusing in this middle area, what we call the movable middle. Now, we have worked with Newstar over the last probably more than 6 or 7 months to actually run a specific research study and a very detailed analysis to compare those two media planning approaches. On the one hand, again, reach-based planning. On the other hand, outcomes-based planning. And we put 3 very important questions on the table. We said, is a plan that is designed to maximize outcomes better than reach? Will it deliver a higher return on advertising spend or not? Question number 2 is whether it's practical. It's fine to actually say that, we're going to target the movable middle, but how do you find those people in reality? How do you find and target those people at scale? And then there's a third question. And the question here is, will following such an approach, an outcomes-based plan, will it also help the brand to grow? I mean, a lot of the criticism against targeting is that a lot of times targeting goes to your own customers. And that means that, you're sacrificing the future of the brand for the present of the brand, right? You're just trying to drive performance among a smaller group of people, and then you're not building for the future. So we wanted to put this model to test, and we wanted to see if following an outcomes-based plan that focuses on the movable middle, will it also bring new buyers? Or would that mean that, we will sacrifice, future buyers and the future health of the brand for the present performance? Now, I want to spend a couple of minutes to talk to you about our approach and how we actually put together this analysis. And I want to focus on 2 things. I want to focus, first of all, in terms of how we constructed the analysis. I'm just going to try to stay high level on this one because we have a lot to cover. But I also want to kind of talk a little bit about why we believe that this approach will always deliver better results. We've run a test now, we have validated this analysis across a number of different categories, but we also think that there's something mathematically true about this specific approach, something that guarantees that this will always work. To some extent, maybe some categories will work to a higher extent, maybe in some other categories to a smaller extent, but there is something behind it that is a mathematical truth. So I want to talk about those 2 things. I want to first talk about what we did and our approach in a little bit more detail. So we did 3 things. The first thing was to create what we call a sandbox, a digital representation of a marketplace. We chose the frozen pizza brand, and we kind of recreated the entire marketplace for pizza using numerator receipt scanning data, and we kind of replicated this entire market. Then what we also did is that we distributed over 600,000 virtual consumers across a number of different segments. So we work with Newstar, and Newstar has the Element 1 segmentation that has 172 segments. So we took this 623,000 virtual consumers and we allocated across these different segments. And then we simulated this 1 year of purchasing activity for this specific marketplace. Now, with that in mind, then the fun part began. It was a time to run the media. And we ran 3 different media scenarios. The first one was a baseline media plan. We work with our marketer advisory board to validate some of the assumptions in terms of the media allocation, in terms of CPMs that will be kind of realistic. and we develop a baseline scenario. And then we also developed two different media planning optimization scenarios. One was focused more on optimizing for reach. It was more about saying, how can we improve and increase the reach that our campaign kind of delivered, in the most cost-effective way. And then the other one was an outcomes-based plan. It was more about kind of trying to do what I said before earlier about focusing on the movable middle. How can we take some of the funds from what we think are the lowest performing segments and put them in order to kind of focus more on those movable middles that we think that they will respond at a higher rate, right? So this was in theory the three different media plans that we did. And then of course we analyzed the results, and we did some work to confirm the extensibility to other categories. So we validated some of the key assumptions and mathematical principles behind it for 46 brands across 4 categories. And then, of course, last but certainly not least, we validated all that with our academic board, and who reviewed all our model assumptions and the specific kind of findings that we produced. Okay, so this is our approach and what we did. Now, I want to focus a little bit on 2 important scientific principles that I think are very, very interesting to actually ground us in terms of why we think this thing works and why we had this strong hypothesis that it would work. Now, remember those people that we had before in the earlier slide, right? So we have all these different people, and we talked about the people to the left and the people to the right and the people in the middle. Now, there is this is a more scientific representation of that. This is what this curve shows is what we feel is the ad responsiveness curve is going to look like. Right? On the one side, you have people who purchase every time. The ad responsiveness is going to be very low because they will purchase anyway. Right? So you can see that the curve here, to the right, is very, very low. The same thing happens on the other side, on the left side of the screen, at least my left. I hope it's your left as well. And you can see that there's some people to the left that they will never buy you, and you really kind of, the responsiveness to your advertising will be very, very low. So it's that part in the middle. People who say, let's start from 50-50. People who had a 50-50 chance of buying you, I mean, these are people who definitely will have the highest kind of likelihood to actually be influenced by your advertising. It's like flipping a coin would be 50-50. So you can actually kind of advertise to them and try to kind of move them to the right kind of direction, right? But we actually define this movable middle more broadly. So we said it's not just 50-50. Let's define it from 20% to 80% probability of actually purchasing the brand. And let's just see what happens if we focus our attention and our media dollars to this target group. Okay, so this is the movable middle. We feel and we have enough of a scientific kind of a hypothesis that their ad responsiveness is going to be higher. The question now is, where do you find them, and how many are they? Are they enough for it to begin with? And the good news is that there is a way to calculate and to estimate the size of that movable middle with almost 99% accuracy. It's called the beta distribution. There is a whole kind of mathematical background behind it. But what we found is that it can actually very accurately predict that number and that size of that movable middle. So for a 5% brand, it will be about 7%. And you can see that green bar on the chart that represents the movable middle. For a 20% brand, 20% share brand, it would be a little higher. It would be 33% movable middle. And for a larger brand, it would be even larger, 46% market share. The movable middle will be more than 50%. It would be 53%. So you can see here that there's something unfortunate if you're a small brand. The smaller the size of your brand, the smaller the size of your movable middle, which means that if you're a 5% brand, and if you're reaching everybody, 92% of your dollars will fall to unresponsive people. It will fall to those people here to the left, right? People who have a low responsiveness to your advertising, right? So the question then is, what do you do if you're a smaller brand, right? Or even if you're a middle brand, let's say that you're 20% share brand, you're still kind of advertising your movable middle is only 1 out of 3 consumers. Everybody else is going to be less responsive. So what do you do about it? Well, the good news is that even a small brand is a large brand somewhere. Let me say that again. If you're a 5% brand, if you're a 20% brand, you're not 20% across the board. You could be, you can have a higher market share in some cases, in some segments, and you can have a lower market share in some cases. Now that's an assumption, but it's also reality. We've proven that by taking this 20% market share brand that we had here and seeing what was the market share of that brand across these 172 segments. Remember that I mentioned before we work with Newstar, and they have they have the element 1 segmentation that has 172 segments, right? So we actually try to see, what is the ranking order of all those segments based on, the share in the movable middle of that specific brand. And we saw that the same 20% brand can be a 20% brand for segment 141, but it can be a 40% brand for segment 166, and it can be, I don't know, like a 5% brand for segment 2, right? So the idea here is a simple one. We can estimate, the movable middle, the size of the movable middle, and then if we have a segmentation like this, and element 1 is the Newstar segmentation, but there's probably other tools out there, you can actually focus on those segments to the left, those segments that have a higher share of movable middles, because these are the segments that that are likely to be more responsive to your advertising. All right, so this is the thesis. This is a little bit about the science behind it. So I want to kind of ground us before I show you some of the results. But this is the exciting part. This is what we found. Okay. Now I'm going to put those people again, who are the people that we started from the first slide. But you can see from the headline here that consumers in the movable middle were indeed a lot more responsive than all the other consumers to the left and to the right. They indeed had a 5 times higher return on advertising spend compared to those other people. Now, remember we predicted that the ad responsiveness would be higher. Now, this is actual fact that their return on advertising spend was 5 times higher. Now, that's finding number 1. Now, let's build on that a little bit. What happens if you focus on those segments that were to the left? Remember those segments that we said that they have the higher movable middle? Well, we took those segments, as we said, and we rank ordered them. And we took the top quartile and the bottom quartile. Now, the top quartile is the segments that have the highest number of movable middles. They have a higher kind of market share of movable middles. And the bottom quartile, obviously, is the opposite. And you can see how that works, right? The top quartile has an average of 32% of movable middles. The bottom quartile has 3% of movable middles. You see the return on advertising spend? Very different, right? So what this says is that not only we can actually see that the movable middles, as we said before, have a higher overall return on advertising spend, but also if you target those specific segments that have more of those people, you're much more likely to have a much higher return on advertising spend for your campaign, as we can see here. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important because that's not what we usually do. And this, I think, is going to kind of flesh that out a little bit more. These are the 3 plans that we had. We had the base plan, the reach plan, and the outcomes plan. Now you can see that we broke down the media kind of allocation between TV and digital. And you can see that TV was 35% on the first one and 65%, and digital was 65%. Then the reach plan that had to reach more people, we increased the TV allocation to 45%, and then the outcomes based plan was heavier on digital because obviously we had to be more targetable. We had to be able to reach those segments in a more targeted way. Now, but the real important piece of information on this slide is that the first 2 plans, base plan and reach plan, you see that they have been kind of proportional across those specific quartiles. They didn't kind of invest more in the top quartile or the middle quartile or the lower quartile. They kind of fell naturally across all the different segments that we had. Which, of course, that was by design, right? I mean, you don't really think about that when you're kind of developing your reach plan. You just want to reach the most number of eyeballs. On the other hand, the outcomes-based plan focus more on the green quartile. The green quartile, remember, is the one that we know that it has the largest number of movable needles, and we found out also that it had the higher return on advertising spend. So what does that mean? Well, here's what happens. It turns out that by doing that, you can validate that hypothesis, and you can see here that the outcomes-based plan over-delivered and outperformed by over 50% when it comes to in relation to the base plan and in relation to the reach plan, right? So for the reasons that we explained, because we targeted the movable middles, because these movable middles have a higher responsiveness and a higher return on advertising spend, by overemphasizing on this. I mean, we didn't just go only to this, right? You can see that we targeted other segments as well. We served other segments as well, but we overemphasized on the green segment, and by doing that, we managed to actually have a higher return on advertising spend. Okay, so that's the important stuff. But wait, we said that a plan that is designed to maximize outcomes can be executed. We proved that. We've proven that it can be executed with a high return on advertising spend compared to reach. We saw that a minute ago. But there's still another question. Will doing that help the brand grow? I mean, we haven't talked about new buyers or new users here. We just basically proved that outcomes-based planning can actually have a higher return on advertising spend. But does sacrificing some reach means that we're also sacrificing bringing in new buyers? Because that would be kind of an important finding. It would be an important kind of downside of using outcome-based planning. Well, here's the interesting thing. It turns out that by focusing on the movable middles, you can actually drive penetration as well. And here's how. I mean, here's a comparison of the three plans. You can see the three columns: the base plan, the reach plan, and the outcomes-based plan. And on the lines, on the rows of this table, you can see the different buyer types, whether you were a heavy buyer, a medium, a light buyer, or a non-buyer. Now take a look at this circled area here. This shows you the 12-week penetration from campaign start. So after the campaign ended, another 4 weeks. And it shows you that the outcomes-based plan drove a higher penetration among non-buyers in comparison to the reach plan. It actually did drive higher penetration across all the different groups, but I just wanted to focus specifically on the non-buyers because that was a kind of an ingoing concern that we had. Right? Now, why is that? It's an interesting finding. We weren't expecting that, to be honest. But it turns out that movable middles are not just buyers. They can be non-buyers as well. 40% of movable middles, as you can see in this chart, are either non-buyers or light buyers, and 20% are non-buyers. They haven't bought the brand at all, but they are in the movable middle segment. Why? Because they probably have some of the characteristics that makes them lookalikes of buyers. I mean, think about those segments that your brand has a higher market share. You don't get 100% market share. You have probably 30% market share. Those other people in that segment are sharing some of the same characteristics, and they're much more likely to also be responsive to your advertising, which is what this thing proven us. And by doing that, we managed to actually do something remarkable. We managed to be able to bring in non-buyers in a profitable way. I mean, bringing in non-buyers is an important challenge, and it's an important strategic objective of any brand. But we all know that this usually takes a lot of media to do that. I mean, the average return on advertising spend of non-buyers is $1.20, as you can see here. But in this case, the non-buyers that we attracted, those non-buyers that were also movable middles, their return on advertising spend was much higher. It was $3.10. So in that sense, targeting the movable middle is also a profitable way winning over those non-buyers who are more likely to respond. So with that, I'd like to take a quick moment to summarize. We covered a lot of ground today. I hope that was interesting, and we're very excited about this research. I want to summarize and kind of give you the four key kind of takeaways, the four key findings, I think the key messages from this research. We talk about four things. We talk about the movable middle, and we define it, and we said that the movable middle is those consumers who are more responsive to advertising. We just explained the science behind it, and we actually proved that they have a five times higher ROAS compared to everybody else. So we talk about the movable middle. We also talk about outcomes-based planning, which is building on that movable middle and prioritizing that movable middle versus reaching all the segments proportionally. So we talk about that. We also compared this new approach, outcomes-based planning, with the traditional approach of reaching everybody. We found out that outcomes-based planning indeed outperforms reach-based planning by over 50% in terms of ROAS. And we explained and discussed how this is mathematically accurate and based on the science of ad responsiveness. And then last but not least, we discussed about the more strategic issue of growing your brand. Any sort of planning approach, reach-based planning or outcomes-based planning needs to deliver for the present and for the future. And we explain and we show with evidence that targeting the movable middles is indeed a profitable way of winning over non-buyers. The winning over non-buyers is usually a big challenge, and it comes at a lower ROAS. But with this specific approach, you can identify those movable middles that are more likely to respond. Okay, I hope that was interesting. I hope that was kind of exciting for all of you, and I thank you for your attention.